67 years old when the bank called, and I almost didn't answer. It was a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of morning where the light comes in sideways through the kitchen window and everything looks like it's from a different time. I was standing at the counter making oatmeal, the kind with brown sugar and little cream, the way my husband Edward had always made it, when my phone buzzed on the table. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Mrs. Whitfield. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. A man. This is Stephen Park from First Heritage Bank in Maplewood. I'm the estate services manager here. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks. I turned down the burner. I'm sorry, I don't think we've ever spoken. No, ma'am, we haven't. But your husband, Edward Whitfield, had a safe deposit box registered at this branch. It's been here since 2019. Your name is listed as the sole authorized person to access it. I'm calling because, well, there are some documents inside that I believe you need to see, sooner rather than later. I set down my spoon. Edward had been gone for 2 years. He died on a Sunday afternoon in January, quietly in his recliner in the living room while the football game was on. The doctor said it was his heart. Fast. He didn't suffer, they told me, and I've held on to that the way you hold on to a railing in the dark, not because it helps you see, but because it keeps you from falling. We had been married for 31 years. He was a civil engineer, methodical and careful about everything he did. He kept a notebook by the door for grocery lists. He changed the smoke detector batteries every single October, first Sunday without being reminded. He was not a man who did things without a reason. So when Stephen Park told me my husband had a safe deposit box I knew nothing about, registered quietly, years before his death, with my name and only my name on the access card, I didn't feel suspicious. I felt something more complicated than that. I felt like Edward was trying to tell me something. I drove to the bank that Friday. The box was smaller than I expected. Grey metal, the size of a shoebox. Stephen Park led me to a private room and left me alone with it, which I appreciated. I sat down, took a breath, and opened the lid. There were 3 things inside. The first was a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in Edward's handwriting. Just Sylvia, but no, that wasn't right for my story. My name is Winifred. Win, he always called me. And there it was, in his careful block letters, for Win. Open this when you need to. The second was a USB drive taped to a folded piece of paper. The third was a second envelope, thicker, marked attorney. Do not open, except in the presence of counsel. I opened my envelope first. He had written 4 pages, front and back, in his small, neat handwriting. I won't repeat everything he said because some of it is private. Between a husband and a wife, the kind of thing that belongs only to the 2 of you. But he told me that he had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition 18 months before he died. He hadn't told me. He said he couldn't bear to watch me worry, and that he knew I would spend whatever time he had left taking care of him instead of letting him take care of me. He apologized for that. He said it was the one selfish thing he had ever done. And then he told me about Claudette. Claudette was Edward's younger sister. She was 59, lived about 40 minutes away in a town called Fairview, and she had never, not once in 31 years, treated me like I belonged in her brother's life. I want to be fair. Claudette wasn't always cruel. She wasn't the kind of person who made scenes at Christmas dinner or said terrible things to my face. She was more careful than that. She worked in small ways, the way water works on stone, slowly, persistently, leaving damage you don't notice until one day you look, and the whole surface has changed. She would mention, casually, that Edward seemed tired lately. Was I keeping him up? She would ask in front of others whether we had thought about having children, knowing full well that we had tried for years, and it hadn't happened, knowing full well it was a wound. She would compliment the house with just enough hesitation that the compliment felt like a question. It's really cozy for its size, isn't it? Edward loved his sister. He knew she was difficult. We had talked about it, gently, without it ever becoming a real argument. And I had always told him the same thing. She's your family, and I can handle her. And I could. For 31 years, I handled her. But Edward, in his letter, told me something I hadn't known. 4 years before he died, Claudette had come to him alone and asked him to change his will. She wanted the house, our house, the colonial on Birchwood Lane, where we had lived for 22 years, where I had planted the hydrangeas along the back fence, and repainted the kitchen twice, and kept 31 years of Christmas ornaments in boxes in the attic. She told Edward that if something happened to him, a house that size was too much for me to maintain alone. She said she was thinking of my well-being. She said she and her husband Owen had always admired the property. She said it made more sense for the house to stay in the family. Edward had told her no. Then she came back 2 years later, 6 months before he died, though neither of them knew that at the time, and tried again. This time she brought Owen, and they had papers. An attorney had drawn up a document that would transfer the house to Claudette upon Edward's death, with a provision that I could remain as a resident, not an owner, a resident, for up to 3 years, after which the property would be sold and the proceeds split between Claudette and her 2 adult children. Edward had told her no again. And then he came home and started building this box. I sat in that small room at the bank for a long time after I finished reading. The USB drive, I learned later, contained a video. Edward had recorded it on his phone, sitting at his desk in the study, looking directly at the camera. He was thinner than I remembered. The heart condition, I realized now, watching him. He was wearing his green cardigan, the one with the worn elbow. He looked tired but calm. He explained everything he had written, but out loud, in his own voice for the record. He described Claudette's 2 visits. He described the document she had brought. He had photographed every page before sending her away, and he describes the attorney she had used, a man named Aldrich Bowman who, it turned out, had done estate work for Owen's family for years. Then Edward looked straight into the camera and said, "Win, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone and something has probably already happened. I want you to know that I took care of it. You take care of the rest. Call Daniel Ferris. He knows everything." Daniel Ferris was an estate attorney Edward had worked with years ago on a commercial project. I had met him once at a company dinner. I hadn't thought about him in a decade. I called him from the parking lot of the bank. He remembered Edward immediately. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me, which told me Edward had already spoken to him. He asked me where I was, told me to come to his office that afternoon, and said only, "Bring everything in the box." I drove to his office on the other side of town with the metal box in my passenger seat and my heart doing something unsteady in my chest. Daniel was in his early 60s, grey-haired, with a kind of steady manner that makes you feel like whatever is happening can be handled. He read through everything Edward had left. He watched the video twice. He opened the second sealed envelope, the one marked for counsel, and read through the documents inside without any visible reaction, which I've since learned is what good attorneys do. Then he set everything down and folded his hands on the desk. "Your husband was extremely thorough," he said. "He changed the smoke detector batteries every October," I said. It was the only thing I could think to say. Daniel explained what Edward had done. Over the year before his death, he had quietly updated several things. He had established a living trust that transferred the house directly to me outside of probate, which meant the property could not be contested through the standard estate process. He had updated his life insurance beneficiary. He had left a detailed written record of Claudette's 2 attempts to pressure him, with dates, the names of witnesses present at the second meeting, and photographs of the document she had brought. And he had recorded the video as a sworn statement, team-stamped and witnessed digitally, specifically to be used as evidence if Claudette made any legal move after his death. "She can still try to contest," Daniel said, "but she won't win." He closed every door. I drove home and sat in my kitchen for a long time. The oatmeal from that morning was still on the counter. The light had changed. I thought about Edward in his green cardigan, recording himself at his desk, doing all of this quietly so I wouldn't worry. I thought about 31 years of small, careful kindnesses. I put my face in my hands, and I cried, not from sadness exactly, but from the particular grief of being loved that well by someone who was gone. Claudette called 3 weeks later. I had been expecting it. Daniel had told me to let everything go through him, but she called my personal cell phone on a Wednesday evening while I was folding laundry, and something in me decided to answer. "I think it's time we talked," she said. Her voice was the same as always, measured, pleasant in a way that wasn't quite warm. "About the house, about what makes sense going forward." "I'm listening," I said. She spoke for a while. She said she and Owen had been worried about me. She said a house that size, alone, at my age. She paused there, the way she always did, letting the implications settle. She said Edward would have wanted me to be practical. She said she had spoken to an attorney and there were options worth considering. She said she hoped we could handle this like family. I let her finish. "Claudette," I said, "I have an attorney as well. His name is Daniel Ferris. Please have your attorney contact him directly. I won't be discussing the house further." Silence. "I think," she said slowly, "that you don't understand the full picture here." "I think I do," I said. "Good night." I hung up and stood there holding the phone in my laundry room with my heart pounding. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something harder than anger. It was the feeling of finally, after 31 years, being done being handled. Her attorney contacted Daniel within the week. They filed a claim arguing that the living trust Edward had established was invalid, that he had lacked full mental capacity when he signed it, due to his undisclosed heart condition and the medications he had been taking. They also alleged that I had exerted undue influence over Edward in the final years of his life, steering him to exclude Claudette from any meaningful inheritance. I want to be very clear about what that claim meant. They were saying that I, a 67-year-old retired librarian who had spent 31 years building a life with a man I loved, had manipulated my dying husband into cutting out his own sister. They were saying the house I'd lived in for 22 years, where I knew the sound every floorboard made and had watched the hydrangeas come back every spring, was not really mine. Daniel was calm about it. He had seen worse. He filed our response and submitted Edward's video as primary evidence, along with the physician records confirming that Edward had been lucid and fully competent at the time of every document he signed, and the written testimony of 2 witnesses present at the trust signing. He also submitted the photographs Edward had taken of the document Claudette had brought to their second meeting, the one prepared by her family's attorney, the one that would have made me a guest in my own home. That document had a date on it, and that date was 8 months before Edward signed his living trust, which meant Edward had not been pressured by me. He had been pressured by his sister, and he had responded by methodically protecting his wife. The judge looked at that evidence and did not take long. The hearing was on a grey morning in March. I wore the navy blazer I'd bought for Edward's memorial service because it was the most serious thing I owned. Daniel sat beside me at the plaintiff's table. Claudette and Owen sat across the room with their attorney, Aldrich Bowman, who was older than I expected and had the look of a man who knew his case was not going well. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named the Honourable Sandra Okafor, and she had clearly read every document in the file before she walked in. She asked Bowman several pointed questions about the basis for the mental incapacity claim. He answered carefully. She did not appear satisfied. Then she turned to the evidence Daniel had submitted and spent several minutes reviewing the timeline out loud, the date of Claudette's first visit, the date of her second visit with the prepared document, and the date Edward had signed his trust. She asked Bowman to explain how a man being pressured by his wife would have begun the legal process of protecting her from his sister before his wife could have possibly known there was anything to protect her from. Bowman had no good answer. The judge ruled in my favour on every point. She found that Edward's trust was valid executed with full legal capacity, and that the claim of undue influence was not supported by the evidence. She also found that the claim had been brought without sufficient legal basis, and she awarded attorney's fees and costs against Claudette, just over $41,000. I heard Claudette make a small sound across the room. I didn't look at her. Outside on the courthouse steps, Daniel shook my hand and said Edward would be proud of me. He did all the work, I said. You showed up, Daniel said. That counts for a lot. I drove home the long way, through the part of town where the old elms still arch over the road, and in the spring the light through the new leaves is something close to miraculous. It was March and the trees were still bare, but I drove that way anyway. I needed the time. I've thought a lot since then about what Edward did for me, not just the legal maneuvering, not just the careful documents and the video and the box, but the decision behind all of it. He was a man who knew he was running out of time, and he spent a portion of that time making sure I would be safe. Not rich, not free of grief, just safe, in my house, in the life we had built. Claudette and I have not spoken since the courthouse. Owen sent me a letter 6 weeks later that I read once and put away. I don't wish them harm, but I'm done explaining myself to people who look at 31 years of a good marriage and see only an asset to be redistributed. The hydrangeas came back this spring, same as always, big and blue along the back fence. I stood at the kitchen window looking at them the morning they opened and thought about Edward, methodical and careful, changing the batteries in October, writing 4 pages in his neat block handwriting, looking into a camera in his green cardigan. You take care of the rest, he said. I did. I want to say something to anyone watching this who is in the middle of something similar. A family member who smiled at the funeral and started making calls the following week. A relative who keeps talking about what makes sense and what's practical and what your loved one would have wanted, as if they knew better than you did. I want you to know that there is a document for every manipulation, a record for every conversation that should have been witnessed, a door your person may have already closed before they left. Look in the box. It may be a real box, like mine, in a bank branch you've never visited. It may be a file in a drawer, or a name written in the margin of a will. But the people who love us carefully tend to leave things behind. Evidence of the love, yes, but also armor. Edward left me armor. I'm wearing it still. I've thought about what happened to me, to Edward, to Claudette, to all of it, long enough now that I think I finally understand what the whole thing was really about. And it wasn't about the house. It was never about the house. Claudette wanted something she felt she deserved, and when she couldn't get it through love, she tried to get it through pressure, and when pressure didn't work, she tried to get it through law. That progression tells you everything about a person's character. It tells you that what they were after was never really the thing they claimed to want. What she wanted was to win. And the particular cruelty of people like that is that they don't understand. They genuinely cannot see that the kind of winning they're chasing costs them something they can never get back. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I used to. In the months right after the courthouse, I would lie awake some nights and feel a hot, low anger about what she had tried to do, not just to me, but to Edward's memory, to the life we had built, to the truth of who he was. She had stood in front of a judge and said, my husband wasn't in his right mind when he chose to protect me. That's what I couldn't let go of for a long time. Not the house. That. But here's what I've come to understand. Claudette made every choice she made freely, and every one of those choices had a consequence she brought entirely on herself. She chose to approach her brother privately, twice, with documents she had prepared in advance. She chose to file a claim with no real legal foundation. She chose to call my husband's love for his wife a symptom of mental incapacity, and the consequence of all that choosing was $41,000 in attorney's fees, a public court record, and a sister-in-law she will never speak to again. She built that outcome, brick by brick, with her own hands. Edward, on the other side of things, made different choices. He found out he was running out of time, and he used that time thoughtfully. He could have panicked. He could have told me everything and let me carry the weight of it with him. He didn't. He sat at his desk in his green cardigan, and he made a video, and he wrote 4 pages in his careful handwriting, and he built me something solid to stand on after he was gone. That kind of foresight isn't luck, it's character. It's what happens when a person spends decades practicing the habit of thinking about someone other than themselves. What I want to say, what I think about when I stand at my kitchen window looking at those hydrangeas, is that the things we build in the quiet, unobserved moments of our lives are the things that last. Edward didn't make those documents for recognition. No one was watching. No one was going to praise him for it. He did it because he loved me, and because he was the kind of man who finished what he started, even when the finish line was something he wouldn't live to see. I think about that a lot now. I think about what it means to do the right thing in the small moments, when it costs you something and no one is keeping score. I think that's where real integrity lives, not in the big dramatic gestures, but in the Tuesday afternoon when you sit down at your desk and you do the careful, unglamorous work of protecting the people you love. Claudette is still out there somewhere, 40 minutes away in Fairview. I don't know what her life looks like now. I hope she's found some peace. But I know this, the life I have, this house, this kitchen, these hydrangeas, I have it because one man made good choices consistently, for 31 years, right up until the very end, and I intend to honor that by doing the same.